My name is Michaela Latimer, and I'll be modeling the cardiac cycle for Dr. Sue White's Bio 202 lecture class, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 5 p.m. The cardiac cycle is the period from the start of one heartbeat and the beginning of the next. It alternates between contracting and relaxing, also known as systole and diastole. During systole, the chamber is contracting and it pushes the blood into an adjacent chamber or into an arterial trunk. This is followed by diastole, which is when the chamber fills with blood and gets ready for the next cardiac cycle. When you listen to a heartbeat, you hear two beats that sound like lub-dub. The lub, also known as S1, is the sound of the mitral and tricuspid valves closing at the start of systole. The dub, or S2, is the sound of the aortic and pulmonic valves closing at the end of systole and the beginning of diastole. The cardiac cycle begins with atrial systole, which are the contractions of the atria. This causes the atrial pressures to rise and push the blood into the ventricles through the open right and left atrioventricular valves. These AV valves are the two heart valves of which blood flows from the atria to the ventricles. It also prevents blood from returning to the atrium. At the end of atrial systole, each ventricle will have as much blood as it can hold in this cardiac cycle. That quantity is also called end diastolic volume. As atrial systole is finishing, atrial diastole and ventricular systole are starting. Atrial diastole is the time when the atria are resting. As pressure in the ventricles rise above the atrial pressures, the AV valves are pushed closed. At the beginning of ventricular systole, the ventricles are contracting, but there is no blood flow. These ventricles are in what is called isovolumetric contraction. This means that all of the valves in the heart are closed, ventricular volumes, which is the amount of blood within the ventricles of the heart, do not change, and the ventricular pressure, which is the measure of blood pressure within the ventricles of the heart, are rising. As soon as there is more pressure in the ventricles than the arterial trunks, the semilunar valves and the aortic valve will open and the blood will flow into the aortic and pulmonary trunks. This is called ventricular ejection. Each ventricle will eject roughly 70 to 80 milliliters of blood, which is the stroke volume of the heart. As the ventricular systole is ending, the ventricular pressures will quickly fall. The semilunar valves and the aortic valve will close when the blood in the aorta and the pulmonary trunk flows back to the ventricles, which decreases the pressure in the aorta. As the semilunar valves close, the pressure will rise again as the elastic arterial walls recoil, producing a valley in the pressure tracing called the dicrotic notch. The end systolic volume is the remaining blood in the ventricle when the semilunar valves close. The ventricular diastole is the final period of the cardiac cycle, and it also continues on through the atrial systole in the following cycle. At this point, all of the heart valves are closed. Since the ventricular pressures are still higher than the atrial pressures, blood can't flow into the ventricles, which is called isovolumetric relaxation. During this time, the ventricular pressures will quickly decrease below those of the atria, which forces the AV valves to open, and blood will begin to flow from the atria to the ventricles. This is the primary method of ventricular filling. The cycle will then repeat itself. Thanks for watching.